History contains countless examples of successful crimes, but ideal crimes can be counted on the fingers of one hand. This is not surprising, because it is very, very difficult to pull off a deal so that no one gets hurt, remain unknown until then, and get away with it, while hitting the jackpot. A good example of the author of the perfect crime is Dan Cooper, a man who left a lot of mysteries and not a single answer in his story. But let's talk about everything in order. On November 24, 1971, millions of Americans across the country were preparing for Thanksgiving, and therefore all train stations and airports were packed with people. This is not at all surprising, since everyone wanted to be home as soon as possible to celebrate the holiday with their family. At the same time, at the Portland airport there was an unremarkable middle-aged man with a black briefcase in his hands. He walked up to the check-in counter, calling himself Dan Cooper, and bought a one-way ticket for $20 in cash on Flight 305, a half hour to Seattle. After which he boarded the plane, took his seat, lit a cigarette, and a little later ordered himself a bourbon and soda. Subsequently, passengers who were nearby described Dan Cooper as a very calm man who joked a little and was generally a pleasant person. The flight attendants described his appearance like this. He appeared to be 40 years old, about 180 centimeters tall, weighed about 80 kilograms, had brown eyes, was wearing a black coat and a dark suit with moccasins. An ironed white shirt, and he was wearing a black tie and a mother-of-pearl pin. In general, no special features. You will always notice such a person, but then you won't really remember him. At 14:50, flight number 305 took off, and 8 minutes later Dan Cooper passed a note to the flight attendant. At first, the girl thought that the man had given her his phone number or something like that, which is why she did not read it and immediately put it in her pocket. Then Dan Cooper walked up to her, leaned over a little and quietly said, "Miss, you better look at the note. I have a bomb." After such a statement, Florence immediately sat down and read the note, the contents of which were approximately as follows. "I have a bomb in my briefcase and I will use it if I deem it necessary. I want you to sit next to me." By the way, it is worth noting that the text of the note was written with a black felt tip pen and consisted of neat block letters. After reading it, Cooper immediately took the note. Next, he opened the case and showed the flight attendant a device that she described as a bomb. Afterwards, the criminal asked the flight attendant to convey his demands to the pilots. Provide him with $200,000 in unmarked $20 bills and 2 sets of parachutes. In addition, he demanded that the plane be refueled after landing in Seattle. When the flight attendant returned from the cockpit, Cooper was already wearing sunglasses. Why he put them on is unclear. At the same time, a pilot named William Scott contacted Seattle-Tacoma Airport Air Traffic Control and described the situation that had occurred on board. The dispatchers, in turn, passed on the information received to both local and federal authorities. By the way, due to the fact that Dan Cooper acted quietly and secretly, panic on the plane was avoided. The pilots informed passengers that arrivals in Seattle would be delayed due to minor technical difficulties, so many did not understand the seriousness of the situation for a long time. While the plane was in the sky, the head of the airline gave his subordinates an order to fulfill all the demands of the criminal. Police officers and FBI agents also came to meet Dan Cooper. In a few hours they found the required amount of money, a parachute, and prepared an emergency team. Here's another interesting fact. Flight attendant Florence Schaffner claimed that Dan Cooper was very familiar with the area around Seattle. He unmistakably pointed to a city called Tacoma, and also noted that McCarthy Air Force Base was located nearby. Another flight attendant claimed that Cooper behaved extremely calmly, politely, and confidently. She later even admitted that he seemed nice to her and did not look like a criminal at all. And even after his disclosure, Dan Cooper ordered bourbon for himself and always paid for it in full. He also asked for additional food for the plane crew. At 17:24, Cooper was informed that all his requirements had been fully met, and then he allowed the pilots to land at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. As soon as the plane touched down, the pilots received the following instructions: to arrive at the most distant section of the runway, and also to turn off all the lights on the plane so that the snipers could not see what was happening inside. Then a policeman approached the aircraft, who actually delivered the money, as well as a parachute, passing it through the door at the rear of the plane. Afterwards, Cooper kept his word and released all the passengers, as well as several flight attendants. While the plane was being refueled, the criminal explained to the crew their further actions. They had to head for Mexico City, while the plane had to remain at the lowest possible altitude and speed. In addition, he specified that the landing gear remain extended, the wing flaps were lowered by 15 degrees, and the cabin remained unpressurized. A pilot named William tried to convey to Cooper that such a flight could be dangerous, but the criminal convinced him that everything would be fine. At the same time, FBI agents were trying to figure out Dan Cooper's plans. They simply did not understand why he needed 2 parachutes and what he was going to do next, but again there were many more questions than answers. After the plane was refueled, the pilots received orders to take off. At about 19 to 40 the plane was already airborne. During takeoff, Cooper asked Tina Macklow to go into the cockpit and close the door. As Macklow left, she noticed that Cooper was tying something around his waist. At the same time, 2 F-106 fighters were lifted from McArdale Airfield and flew behind the plane so that Cooper could not see through the windows. For some time, a T-33 Lockheed training aircraft flew behind the plane, but near the Oregon-California border it had to leave tracking due to lack of fuel. A total of 5 military aircraft were tracking the Boeing aircraft. Already, at 20-00, a warning light lights up in the cockpit. This meant that the stern ladder apparatus was brought into action. Using the intercom system, the pilot asked Cooper if he needed help, but he told them he could handle it on his own. The crew soon noticed a change in air pressure, indicating that the aft door was open. At approximately 2013, the tail of the plane suddenly gave way upward so much that the crew urgently had to level the plane. At approximately 10:15 p.m., the plane landed at the airport. The plane's tail ladder remained deployed all this time. FBI agents, state police, and sheriff's deputies surrounded the plane because it was not yet certain that Cooper was no longer on board. But an armed search quickly confirmed his absence. From this moment on, the further fate of Dan Cooper remains completely unknown. In fact, we can say that further investigation did not bring any serious results. After searching the plane, FBI agents were only able to find Cooper's tie and 8 cigarette butts. They have not yet found one of the parachutes, which was missing 2 suspension brackets. Subsequently, employees of the Federal Bureau of Investigation came to the conclusion that he used the pendants to tie a bag of money to himself. The pilots of all 5 planes testified that they did not see Cooper jump out of the plane. It was subsequently discovered that at the time Cooper was supposed to jump, the plane was passing through a thunderstorm area, shielded from any light sources from the ground by a cover of clouds. Due to poor visibility, the jump was not noticed by U.S. Air Force F-106 fighters escorting the aircraft. After conducting an investigative experiment, the FBR concluded that Cooper jumped out at 2013. When the tail of the plane suddenly gave way, which may have been caused by the tail slide deflecting under Cooper's weight at the moment of the jump. At that very moment, the plane was flying over the Lewis River in southwestern Washington. And it was simply impossible to determine exactly where Cooper landed. This is due to the fact that even a small change in the speed of the aircraft completely changes the flight path. But one way or another, the police and FBR combed huge areas, although it did not yield any results. The serial numbers of all the bills were sent to all gambling houses, banks, and other establishments with a large monetary turnover in the United States, but not one of the bills was ever noticed. By the way, the Ushagal River Valley, as the most likely place of Cooper's landing, was searched repeatedly both by individuals and by entire groups, but no other evidence was found. Some investigators have suggested that the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens destroyed any remaining physical evidence. Of course, many wondered who this Dan Cooper was. Researchers have generated a huge variety of theories, but most agree that this criminal was a former or perhaps even an active agent of the CIA or some elite unit. There are really a lot of facts that point to this. Firstly, he was a truly cold-blooded and psychologically strong person. There is no point in arguing with that. Secondly, he was well versed in airplanes, understood how they worked and what they were capable of. He also performed an incredibly difficult jump. Honored test pilot of the USSR Viktor Zabolotsky, in 2020 he told the Komsomolskaya Pravda newspaper that from a professional point of view it is very difficult to do this. To do this you need to have extraordinary skills. Plus, Dan Cooper perfectly understood how the police and the FBI acted. He foresaw their every move and understood perfectly well how they would act in a given situation. In addition to what was described above, it should be mentioned that this criminal could have escaped from the scene of the crime and not given himself away for many years, and this is really not so simple.